16 years of profound expertise in the area of water, sanitation, and hygiene, with a focus during the last 10 years on menstrual health and hygiene. Working for WASH United, she co-initiated the Global Menstrual Hygiene Day that takes place on May 28th every year, for which she is the international coordinator. Aside from working on partnerships, knowledge management, advocacy on image, menstrual hygiene, and health, all around the year, she is also leading education work in MHM. And Ina is passionate about building partnerships around menstruation, linking WASH, education, and gender equality for collective impact. Let's hear from Ina Jurga.
Thank you, Shobana. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. A very good morning, afternoon to everyone, and thank you for organizing this session. As you just mentioned, I'm passionate about partnerships, and partnerships also means reaching out to other actors and other specialists so that we're all working with the same goal. So very happy to give you a kind of a kick-off presentation with 3 parts. The first part will be, I'll talk a little bit what is menstrual health and hygiene and what it means, especially for those who have not worked on it yet. The second part will do a small deep dive into different aspects, where we'll also highlight the role of the FSM community. And in the last part, I'll give you a quick outlook and maybe a call to action. Now, Finn is moving the slides, so thank you very much, Finn, to move over. So why does menstrual health and hygiene matters? On a given day, there are more than 300 million women and girls who are menstruating. We also say that not every woman and girls are menstruating, and that not everyone was menstruating as a woman and girl, but for the ease of it, we just keep women and girls. So that's a huge number. And if you compare to that, there's a figure that 500 million women and girls globally, which is a quarter of the global population, face constraints in their needs. And the needs can be multifaceted. The access and to a safe and well-managed toilet, clean water, soap is one of the key factors contributing to this number. And also, I think it's really important to stress that this is really a global issue. So while we often speak of low and middle income countries, we have really seen more and more information and statistics about the term so-called period poverty also in high income countries. So this is, I think, a very, very sad numbers that definitely keeps us moving. Next slide, please. So the impact of poor menstrual health and hygiene is multifaceted. So I don't pull in here statistics because I just want to give you the highlights and also how it's framed. So overall, because of the stigma and taboos and because of the lack of good MHMs, the general well-being of women and girls are limited. So they feel shame, they feel just also a lot of pain, and there's a lot of how to say, yeah, just if you just put yourself in the shoes that every month for 3 to 5 to 6 days you don't have a decent toilet, that really limits your well-being. We've seen statistics around the world that poor MHH, especially in schools, leads to girls not attending school during their periods, sometimes even dropping out completely when they enter puberty, or also as a fact, not being well concentrated during sessions when they have the puberty. So there is an often cited that there are a good number of girls not attending school and thus having a reduced education outcome. Impact on health, I think, is pretty clear. If you don't have good products, water to maintain your hygiene, and as well, it has a very deterring factor on health. including in health, is pain management, which is really more and more coming up as one of the key factors women and girls suffer. Workplace is, so we're not only talking about young adolescent girls, but also women in the workforce. If you don't have proper infrastructure at the workplace as well, maybe a good workplace policy. We've seen also statistics about reduced work efficiency, reduced working days due to menstruation. And lastly, of course, the environment. As you can imagine, if there is no proper waste management and the menstrual products end up outside or are not disposed of properly, there's definitely impact on the environment. So this is very, very brief, and there's much more details that we can discuss in the breakout rooms. Next slide. What is also important for everyone working in the space is that MHH is critical for achieving the sustainable development goals. And of course, for us here, the clean water and sanitation target number 6 is the most relevant, but it actually links to a couple of other goals, including and mainly gender equality. As I mentioned, also education, work, good health, well-being, and regarding the environment and production of pets, responsible consumption and production. There is no direct indicator for menstrual hygiene or menstrual health and hygiene in the SDGs, but you can find it in the infrastructure for school under the SDG 4, kind of an improved indicator, and of course under clean water and sanitation as well. I think it's also important that, and I want to stress it here, that the SDGs underscore to leave no one behind. So to fulfill these SDGs for all and everyone. So when we talk about women and girls, we also really have to think about people like living in emergency situation, people with disabilities in remote areas, etc., etc. So I think this is where every focus also should go. Next slide. So you've probably seen me using the term menstrual health and hygiene. So this is a kind of, and I just want to put it out here because we'll use the term, and I also see Shobana using a different term. So initially, menstrual hygiene management was used, especially by the wash sector. And this concerns all the items which are in the pink bubble, which is access to knowledge, safe and affordable materials, sanitation and washing facilities, including the disposal. And then there was a broad definition by PAF and UNESCO, UNICEF, that also looked at other bigger factor like positive social norms, which I think is absolutely essential, and we'll probably talk about this. Advocacy and policy, informed and comfortable professionals such as you, and the health service. Since April this year, there's the first official definition for menstrual health, and this is available, and I put later on the link there. They actually also covered almost like all the same factors, but I think what is important is to understand that they really it is more alignment with the health definition, sexual reproductive health, and looking at the entire menstrual cycle, not only at the bleeding. So I put that link. So I like to use menstrual health and hygiene because especially I think in our group, it's really important to stress the infrastructure and disposal, because if you just look from a health perspective, that might often be then forgotten by health professionals. So just that's my take on the definitions so far. Next slide. So just giving you some highlights and as a teaser for our continued discussion in this session. So period-friendly infrastructure, next slide. The problem is, of course, and we all know that access, availability, and safety of sanitation at home, in schools, in institutions, and particularly in health centers is really limited. There is progress because there are technical designs, also user-centered approaches to involve women and girls in the design of the toilets, and some guidance there. I think what's often forgotten is that, and especially, for example, in emergency contexts, that there is a need for places for personal hygiene and to wash and dry reusable products. So always think this along, especially if you only have a latrine. Where do women get water from to maintain hygiene? So sometimes when we talk about wash infrastructure in the context of menstrual health and hygiene, it's not only a toilet, but also a washing place. And what I really want to stress is that this is an expertise, like this is an area where the broader MHH community requires the expertise from you in terms of making wash infrastructure more period friendly. Next slide. And related to that, and just a small intro, I received these pictures that are coming now are from the Tamil Nadu Urban Support Program, who participated in MH Day this year with this very nice bracelet campaign. And if anyone from TNUSSP is here in the session, please make yourself known. These are really, really wonderful. So moving on to collection and disposal. This is really often inadequate, and there is a challenge with effectiveness and operation and maintenance. Arundati is going to talk a little bit more in detail with this, about this. So, and it's all very interlinked between the collection and the disposal. So there are solutions from very low cost to a higher tech solution. For example, below you see an oven. There's like sometimes also like with biodegradable pads, there's now the idea to make it compostable. And in the picture above, you see just a chute where women can then drop in their used products. Often it has to be kind of discreet. That's for the discussion. And it really calls for more innovation and a coordination within programs between the infrastructure, disposal, and product. So it all needs to go hand in hand. Because if, for example, schools are distributing disposable pads, they need to be disposed somewhere. So schools need to have that. Otherwise, you create a second problem. Again, this is an area where we as the MHH community look for your innovation experience. And I think you probably have plenty, and the breakout room will be discussing this in more detail. Okay, next slide. As I said, it's all very, very interlinked with the type of menstrual products. And we'll also have a small presentation later, a more detailed presentation. But as you can imagine, the key problem is really the affordability and access together with information. So this is sometimes termed under also like period poverty. But the good thing is that there's quite a lot of progress in that area in terms of sustainable and reusable options. There are period poverty initiatives also by the government, which are mostly pad donations to schoolgirls, but nevertheless, the problem is visible in a few countries. There have been tax reduction or removals on menstrual products to reduce costs and also to address gender equality in general. There are a number of small local social businesses, market incentives. They're not always viable, but I think it's really good. And there's also emerging technical standards, still a way to go, but the better the technical standards, the better also the quality of the products. Yeah. So a key takeaway message for you here is always promote an informed choice. So not one product is the best for everyone. Next slide. And this was really important for me to bring across the workplace perspective, especially for the FSM community. Next slide. Because also what the TNUSSP found, they ask sanitation worker, and a lot of sanitation workers in developing countries are women. So either they have no time to change pads at work, or they're really, because there are no restrooms, they don't get permission to leave. And then also just a very practical one, if they have to sort and they're unwrapped sanitary napkins, then this is quite filthy and unhygienic. So when we're all women in the workplace, or me, but I think especially in the FSM context, it's double important to really consider the menstrual needs of the female workforce. And I think the quotes speak for themselves. Next slide. I close with the end period stigma, because I think that's often the basis why menstrual health and hygiene has been forgotten or not addressed, or is not very comfortable to address, because there's a huge taboo and stigma. Next slide. And we can talk so long about just the stigma around it, and then you've maybe experienced it yourself or within your family. It's just, there's growing recognition of the issue. And yeah, Menstrual Hygiene Day is contributing to breaking the stigma and breaking the silence, and it's the largest growing movement. I don't share so much photos now, because we have the highlights we'll share tomorrow, but here are some impressions. And for me, it's important that we just join hands in breaking the taboos together. Next slide. I'm almost done, Shobana, if that is what you wanted to remind me. So key takeaways. Okay, Finn, you can press the button. So whatever we do, and we're all together, let's work and think cross and multi-sectoral. Yes, we have, or like we here in the FSM community have the knowledge around wash infrastructure. We don't have them maybe around health service or around menstrual products, but let's find people, when we do a program, let's find people who have and work together. You can click into the next. Leave no one behind. I already mentioned rights-based approach is to listen to the ones that we serve. Evidence-based, I think, is self-explanatory, and context-specific. I think this is important, and maybe you can also support, is that no region, no country, and no woman or girl is the same. So applying a user-centered and participatory approach in your program is, I think, really essential to guarantee the success of it. Next slide. Which is then my last. So just as a summary, since the early 2010s, we really make significant progress in the different areas that I just explained. But we also feel that we're at a crossroad. We have a vision by 2030 to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but we won't achieve them. It doesn't look so good, but what we really need is more action and investment in menstrual health and hygiene. And the more we work together, the easier the mountain is, or the more likely it is. So my call to the FSM community is, let's work in partnership and coordinate across the sector, bringing the great innovations and share them, help to break the stigma, and jointly advocating for more investment. Yeah, so that's it. Should be kicked off. Before we go into the details, when Shobana shares, I have a slide about the Global Menstrual Collective, which has been initiated 2 years ago. If you're interested to join, you can contact me, and that, or Therese Mahan, we might know. I put my contact details there in the chat box. And now let's move on. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Ina, for giving this excellent overview on menstrual hygiene and health, wash infrastructure, and a bit on waste management. I work in Germany, but I am from Tamil Nadu, so incredibly proud of the work being done there. So without further ado, let's go to the next presentation. So Gunaraj Shrestha, who's the National Coordinator of the MHM Partners Alliance, would be briefing about the work in Nepal. And he coordinates over 80 member organizations in this alliance. And the members come from various groups like UN agencies, bilateral agencies, international NGOs, local NGOs, civil society, media, researchers, and activists. He is a civil engineer by profession and has over 20 years of professional experience in senior capacities at the World Bank and several INGOs and also the National Planning Commission in Nepal. So over to you, Gunaraj.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon to all the participants here. It's my pleasure to present Nepal's case here, especially to talk about my MHM Alliance in Nepal and what we have been doing. Next slide, please. So I will have two parts here. First part is what is all about this Partners Alliance in Nepal and what it has been working and its linkage with the fecal sludge management in Nepal, right? So in the background, Shobana was telling, we established this alliance in 2017 with a very limited number, 20 members. Now we have a big number, 80 plus. So there are 80 organizations and there are plus many other individual ones, right? Mostly the organizations such as UN, INGOs and media, Shobana already explained. So I'm and leading as a convener. Number one is to give the leadership and coordination at the national level among the agencies, organizations working on MHM, and also work coordination with the government. So we are bridging between government and non-governmental also through coordination mechanism. And actually we do some actions also, not only coordination leadership. So especially there are, as I told, there are more than 80 organizations involved in this alliance and there is a government. So we are coordinating and to harmonize actions and activities and projects and programs of the government and the non-governmental organizations. We have the platform to have a common platform for planning and implementation of MHM-related projects and programs. And we are also we want to be the learning hub in the country to generate evidences and the other many various information regarding to MHM. So we are trying to be learning hub in Nepal Alliance. So in Nepal, we have a set a vision. We are coining the word dignified menstruation. Although there is a lot of taboos here in Nepal, but we want to establish this MHM as a dignified menstruation for girls and women. This is our broader vision. Next slide, please. So normally the mandates of our alliance, some couple of 5-6 bullets here. Normally we work for enabling policy environment, especially working with the government in various sectors, education sector, health sector, waste sector, and women and children. Recently, we have also started working with the commerce and industries because commerce and industries sector is the one for production of menstrual products. So we are adding up that another sector recently. And we are the one to support the government, especially for policy formulation and developing program and projects. So we are providing technical assistance to the government. So as I told, we have the knowledge management. We are working on this, for the knowledge hub already, and we do also innovations and research through our partner organizations or member organizations to generate evidences to minimize taboos and stigma. And also we are working on education sector, especially we are working with the government education ministry to revise school curriculum to include much contents on MHM. So presently the school curriculum having very minimum biological contents only, but now we are working with the Ministry of Education for revising from grade 4 to grade 12. Actually, previously the government having curriculum for MHM from grade 5. Now from this year, through our request, the government has accepted to develop a curriculum even for the grade 4 to include MHM. So these days we are helping the government, the Curriculum Development Center, to write the textbooks and even to have one education toolkit, MHM education toolkit also we are working currently. So in terms of awareness raising, we are mobilizing massively the media, different media, print media, online media, and radio and TVs. These days we can see all medias talking about this MHM issues. And we are also mobilizing various national personalities, especially cine stars and Miss Nepals. So we are doing some capacity building also, what they should be talking about while they are with the media. The other one, last one, is now we are trying to align the actions of different organizations, especially the government and non-governmental organizations, to have a coordinated the plan and program and projects to make a bigger synergistic effect and impact in the country. So these are the key mandates or areas of works we have been doing in Nepal. Next slide, please. So far, since its establishment, we have made some accomplishment. There are a few in bullet. So since 2000, actually MHD was United starting from 2014, but in Nepal we started having national level MHM days since 2018. Now we are the one to host, official host for celebrating national level event on this MS Day. So if you see in 2018, we co-hosted MS Day through 4 ministries, and there are some 600 people participated in 2019, co-hosted with the Ministry of WAS, and 2020 co-hosted with Women and Children. Recently, in May 2021, we co-hosted with the National Planning Commission. So if you see, we are collaborating with the government, the different ministries, different sectoral ministries to bring it together, all right? And in terms of awareness, we are, as I told you, we are massively mobilizing different mass media, TVs, radios, online portals, and we are also developing various videos, radio PSAs, and disseminating through radio, TV, everything. We are celebrating, national celebrity also mobilizing, capacity building, as I told. And we have also started to appoint goodwill ambassadors, MHM goodwill ambassadors since 2017-18. So we have already in last 3 years, we have appointed 3 goodwill ambassadors. So last 2, 2019 and 21, these are quite popular cine stars, Priyanka and Keki. So they have accepted to be our goodwill ambassador, MHM goodwill ambassador. In terms of policy, we have provided, so in Nepal, there is a draft National Policy on Dignified Menstruation drafted in 2018. Now we have been working with the government, providing feedback for wider consultation and for the cabinet approval. We are working with the government and MHM guidelines for the local government as well, and provincial government also. We are working these days. And we are also making some sort of advocacy to exempt taxes to the raw materials of pads so that we can reduce the cost. Through education, as I already mentioned, we are working curriculum revision and textbook also. Then education toolkit also. Currently, we are working to develop MHM education toolkit for the government as part of school curriculum and textbook. We are also orienting and providing reference material to the authors of the textbooks, because the authors are seeking out support to provide with reference material, MHM reference materials. Next slide, please. So in terms of health also, we are also working with the health sector, health ministry, especially for developing the training package for the health workers and teachers in the community level. We are also supporting the government for the national program So recently, in 2019, Nepal government announced free pad distribution to all the girls in the public school, right? So 1.4 million girls are expected to benefit from this free pad distribution. So for that free pad distribution program, we supported, actually, Alliance supported the government to develop a strategy for the free pad distribution program. And we are also helping in supporting the quality standard bureau in Nepal to specify the technical specification of the pads to be distributed free in the school. Normally, we have recommended for biodegradable and compostable. So we have suggested some specific specification for these products also. So in 2018, actually, we organized one big mega seminar and summit on Menstrual Action. So that Menstrual Action has given very many, very valuable strategic recommendations for Nepal for dignified menstruation. So that is the basis for Alliance to make all further strategies. Next slide, please. So future plan advocacy, now we are in terms of largely 2 areas we are trying to focus. So policy environment, we are working with the government to have a policy environment to especially establishing interministerial coordination, because in Nepal there are 5 ministries quite relevant on MHM. So this MHM day also there was a National Planning Commission member, honorable member. She announced honorable member upon our request to establish interministerial high-level coordination mechanism for MHM. That is a quite very good breakthrough, I think, Nepal. So the national policy also now going to finalize and endorse. So these are important ones. So SDG indicators, we are working with the National Planning Commission to set up SDG indicator for dignified menstruation. Next slide, please. Consider this time. So in terms of program and projects, we are seeking some program projects, especially in Nepal, there is emergency WASH cluster and health cluster, especially led by UNICEF. So we are developing the coordination with the WASH and health sector, how those sectors can also address menstruation issue in Nepal. So there is already huge amount of pad being distributed to 1.4 million. So we are working with the government for effective implementation and its monitoring. So we are continuing working for school textbook for MHM contents. Now in Nepal, there is related with fecal sludge management. Now in Nepal, there is a total sanitation campaign ongoing, and there is a master plan also there. So we are trying to integrate our MHM campaign with the master plan, the sanitation master plan. So master plan already has some small component. Master plan contains fecal sludge management, but not so much, elaborated how this MHM safe disposal, especially safe disposal of pads, can be part of fecal sludge management. So this is one area. So we intend and coordinate with the sanitation master plan, the sanitation stakeholders, and then. So we are trying to further increase development partner, various development partners and our members for the joint planning and implementation. So this is all about from Nepal. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Gunaraj, for this insight into the Practitioners Alliance and working with important stakeholders like the government and media. I'm hoping that it would inspire other countries to follow Nepal's path here. If you have questions, please post them in the chat. My colleague is monitoring the questions and we can have a Q&A round, very short one after the presentations. So next, we have Florian Didier, who would be presenting on biodegradable menstrual products. And Florian is a French engineer specialized in natural fibers and biomaterials. He's working at Nidisi for 2 years now, where he's leading the research and development part in the menstrual pad project. And he is also working for the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany on development of biomaterial made from agricultural residue. So over to you, Florian.
Thanks a lot, Shobana. Yeah, good afternoon or good morning to everyone. So yeah, as Shobana said, I will talk today about compostable menstrual pads in Nepal. Yeah, so at Nidisi, where I work, we are focused in Nepal, and of course we are part of the MHM PA alliance that Guna just described. Next slide, please. So quickly the content. So I will start with the Nepal's market overview in terms of menstrual pads. Then I will show you the result of a survey that we realized last year during MH Day. And then I will go to the composition of usual menstrual pads and how it is a problem to the environment. And then I will talk more in detail about the project that we have in nidisi, the menstrual pad project. Next slide, please. So about the market overview. So in Nepal, most of the menstrual products sold are disposable menstrual pads. So when we are talking about tampons, cup, or reusable pads, it's growing, but it's still a very few share of what is sold as menstrual product in Nepal. And regarding menstrual pads, 140 million pads are sold and used per year in Nepal, which approximately is the use of 800,000 women. So when we compare that to 15 million Nepalese women, we see that there's a lot of people who don't have access or can't afford pads. And 60% of those pads are sold in urban area and 40% in rural area. Then regarding the provenance of all the pads, 70% are coming from India, which means that there's only a very few production of Nepalese sanitary pads. And regarding compostable pads, on the market, it's almost inexistent. There's just a very few local producers who it's growing also, but it's very few, and they are only selling pads to their very local communities. And WaterAid, when we regard globally, there's a slow development of biodegradable menstrual pads, even though there's a lot of small projects. When we regard WaterAid, it's still slow. Next slide, please. So we realized last year a survey online, and we spread it via social media. We got 164 answers. And so among those answers, 96% of the women who answer use pads, and almost 80% of them classified the attribute biodegradable as important and as a characteristic who can make them buy these pads. So it's important here to notify that that people are aware of biodegradable pads is important. Then 17% of the women who answer face difficulties to throw their pads, and 4% of them throw their pads in toilets. Next slide, please. So regarding the composition of usual menstrual pads. So there is several layers from 3 to maximum 5. Generally, one is in wood pulp or equivalent, so in cellulosic fiber, and that's the absorbent core. And most of the time it contains SAP, so super absorbent polymer, which are non-biodegradable polymer, and they are here to increase the retention of the pad, because in contact with liquid, they will transform themselves in gel, and so it will retain the liquid. And then all the other layers, so the top sheet, the one in contact with the skin, the transfer layer, who are here to really absorb the liquid from the top sheet, and transfer it to the absorbent core, and the barrier sheet, here to avoid any linkage. They are all in plastic. So it's different kind of plastic, polyethylene, polyester, polypropylene, but it's still plastic. And of course, the packaging is also plastic. And the final goal of sanitary pads is, of course, to get a good absorbency and retention. And next slide, please. And so regarding pollution in the environment, so as I said, there's a lot of plastic. And unfortunately, in Nepal, most of the pads used finish in the nature, either when it's thrown in bins or directly in the environment or in toilet or burn at the end, most of the time finish in the nature. So that's a huge plastic pollution, and that's an important emission of pollution where women are victims, because they should have the possibility and they should have the right to choose not to pollute and to have alternatives. So starting from this fact, plus the fact that in Nepal, a lot of women just don't have access or can't afford pad, we decided to launch the Menstrual Pad project. Next slide, please. So we believe that not a single woman should ever feel ashamed about her period. And that's why we want to produce a biodegradable, local, chemistry-free menstrual pad. Yeah, next slide, please. So about the composition, so the first layer will be non-woven PLA, a biodegradable material. The second layer in absorbent banana fiber. The third layer in a biodegradable bioplastic. The packaging will be in the same material, in bioplastic, and the A5 packaging in cardboard. Next slide, please. And so here we will do all the transformation. So we will extract the banana fiber from the trunk, transform it, and to be able to wash it, refine it. So we'll get something like cotton. And then we will shape it. And thanks to that, we will have a very good absorbent core. And to help us on that, we started a research project with a French university. Yeah, next slide. So the whole concept is that we will create a non-profit company called SuSanA, who will extract and transform the fiber and purchase other raw materials to create the sanitary pad, who will be sold mostly in remote areas to give access to pad to women who currently don't have access, but also to cities. And as it's a non-profit, all the profit that we will generate will go either inside the company to increase the company or to realize awareness campaign. Next slide, please. And this campaign will be either event-based or using our the none of SuSanA. Yeah, so we will do event-based campaign in rural communities at school, around MHM, of course, and women's biology, but there will be also an environmental side about biodegradability, problem of plastic, and communication around the compostability of our pads. Next slide, please. So the conclusion, compostable pads can and will reduce plastic pollution alongside with other reusable products, but it needs to be developed globally. Also to avoid sewage blockage, there's a need of awareness, and as Ina say, there's a need of awareness about period-friendly toilets. And of course, develop waste management system. And the last point is that we need to develop the accessibility, especially in Nepal or other country, of other menstrual products like cup, reusable pads, tampons, etc., because women must be able to have the choice about how to handle their menstruation. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Florian. That was it was really nice to get to know the technology behind biodegradable menstrual hygiene products and also a business concept in Nepal. I know that there are a lot of discussions in the chat. We will go to the questions once we've heard from Arundati, our last presenter. So Dr. Arundati Muralidharan works for WaterAid India and is leading the organization's work on hygiene and wash in institutions. Her work is at the intersection of policy, advocacy, evidence generation, and program implementation. She is passionate. She is a passionate advocate of menstrual hygiene and health, an issue she's been working on for close to 2 decades. So with all this experience, I really welcome Arundati to give her insights on India.
Thank you so much, Shobana, and very warm greetings to everyone. It's great to see the fellow panelists and great to hear them. So where I'm presenting today is actually going to be taking off from what the others have shared, what Ina, Gunaraj, as well as what Florian have shared, and bring it into why we need to be, when we're looking at menstrual health and hygiene policy in India, how we need to look at the various components of this. And especially when we look at waste management solutions for any kind of menstrual waste, we cannot look at it in isolation, as I think Florian has indicated, Gunaraj, as well as Ina has indicated. Next slide, please. So again, just showing this particular slide again, which Ina shared, which is, this has been a very significant achievement for us, which is having a definition of menstrual health. So, and this is very critical for us because it incorporates, puts menstrual health just beyond the purview of the wash sector, which it was in for many years. So here, just summarizing, we're looking at changing knowledge and attitudes. We're looking at important issues of choice and access, especially to a range of menstrual hygiene products. We're looking at supporting and sustaining hygienic use, and we're looking at disposal and waste management solutions. Just one second. Yes, and then I think that underlying all of this is the critical component of quality, and that no matter what we're doing, whether we're providing products, wash services, waste management solutions, and even for that matter, as we're doing awareness sessions and talking about gender and norms, it's important to have that quality lens. And of course, that quality lens differs, but that's an important perspective for us all to maintain as we're working on this. Next, please. About 6 years ago, the government of India came out with a national MHM guidelines, which proposed like a kind of an overarching framework for how we should be addressing menstrual health and hygiene, especially among school-going adolescent girls. And here it embodies all the main pillars of work, access to information, access to safe menstrual absorbents, looking at water sanitation, hygiene infrastructure, and of course, looking at disposal mechanisms with the view that this is what will improve the health, well-being, and dignity of girls and also enable them to remain in school, which was a big concern. But in addition to this, in these 6 years, we've also realized that while this forms the core of any kind of program implementation that we're doing with communities and schools, we also need to be looking at additional policy guidelines, frameworks that exist that are not directly implemented in terms of our intervention on the ground, but which are critical as the back-end work to support these interventions. And this includes quality standards for products, quality standards for incinerators, technical solutions or SOP, standard operating procedures for other type of waste management solutions, procurement processes that government organizations, large donors, large sector players follow to procure products and waste management solutions. And of course, a critical element is also then looking at working with waste collectors, sanitation workers, as they engage with this waste across the value chain. Next, please. So one of the critical things that we've been talking about in India and really pushing for is that one is looking at products and looking at the concept of informed product choice, something that Ina spoke about, but also very importantly saying that the product lens is very intimately tied with the disposal and waste management aspect, something that Florian pointed out. Now, in terms of the product, India has seen a massive explosion at the type of products that are available in the country just in the past decade. We started off with just having your regular sanitary pads being available in the market. In the past, I would say at least 5 to 6 years, we've seen a lot of action and innovation that's happened in the reusable cloth pads and the menstrual panties underwear realm. And over just the past, I would say a few years, a couple of years, we've seen the menstrual cup market also really take off in the country. When we're looking at sanitary pads, it's been great that we've had compostable pads. Several companies are experimenting with those. So we've also seen some innovation in that realm. Critically, what we've also been pushing for is, since we've got this massive product landscape, which is growing and evolving in the country, we also need to make sure that the quality lens is maintained, especially since in India, as maybe in other developing countries, but particularly in India, we see a lot of people claiming pads to be biodegradable, eco-friendly, compostable, environmentally safe, without being able to back it up. So we've seen the Bureau of Indian Standards, which is the Indian government agency that's looking at standards, the quality standards, revise their standards for sanitary napkins. And very importantly, issues of biodegradability, compostability have been incorporated. So if you're a company or a manufacturer, you can actually do a test for compostability and share that, saying that your pad is truly compostable. A massive achievement for us, which is also a bit of a contentious achievement, is that we now have standards for reusable cloth pads and period panties. And these are ones which are mostly for commercial sales, as well as those that are claiming certain attributes such as being antimicrobial. So this is not for every type of reusable cloth pad that we have in the country. Next, please. So we've also want to kind of highlight that the reason why we need to be looking at digging deeper into products and product standards is because it also has an implication for waste management. And this is just a little bit of an illustration that if we have a number of types of products, where do they lend themselves to what type of waste management do they lend themselves to? And this helps us really begin to look at what are those potential solutions for us as we move forward. Next, please. So if you could just click all the buttons, yes. Okay, so we did a very rough calculation based on some market size figures that we had, as well as a number of potential menstruating women in the country. We did this a couple of years ago, so these numbers will have to be updated. But if we're looking at about 336 million girls and women of reproductive age who are potentially menstruating, and we're looking at about 36% of these women using sanitary pads and about 8 pads on average per cycle, then we're looking at generating about 12 billion pads per year. And this is a significant number. This is not to say that disposable sanitary pads should not be used, because we definitely believe on the importance of choice and choosing which product that you're comfortable with. The reason to show this number is not to say take pads out, but to say that if we are generating this waste, then how do we provide solutions? And the reason why we're concerned is for several levels. One is, let's think about the girls and women, the users themselves. Now, when we don't have access to appropriate mechanisms for disposing our used products, then we tend to use that product longer, which makes even the most hygienic of products unhygienic. So first and foremost is concern for the user's own health. The second is there are concerns with regards to the environment. If our pads are being discarded in the open, in water bodies, down sewage lines, then we're seeing a number of problems that are emerging there. And third, and which is now growing in importance, is looking at the rights, the health, the dignity of sanitation workers, who are often faced with having to collect this waste or drag this waste out of clogged sewage lines. So for various reasons, we need to be looking at how do we deal with this waste. If you could go next, please. Next, please. So we can just, yeah, thank you. We can actually just skip this slide and go to the next one. Okay, so there, if we look at the legal, what's our framework for looking at waste management in India, and it may be similar to many countries. First, we wanted to understand what menstrual waste is. So menstrual waste is the blood, the tissues that are discarded from the body during menstruation. We have the absorbent or the material that we're using to absorb or to collect menstrual blood. It could be a pad, it could be a cloth, it could be a cup, it could be a tampon. And together, this is what's comprising of menstrual waste. If we look at the classification of menstrual waste, so the solid waste rules by the government of India in 2016 have classified menstrual waste as solid waste, and with some of the Indian states going a step further, calling it domestic hazardous waste. So calling out the potential hazardous nature of this waste. It is not classified as biomedical waste in the country. Now, our solid waste rules do go on to specify the roles and the responsibilities of users, so those of us who generate the waste, of municipal corporations, those who will deal with this waste, and even manufacturers. But unfortunately, it's not well implemented, so we see a lot of gaps in terms of actually dealing with this waste. Now, when we're looking at safe management, it involves a series of steps, right from disposal, from me, the user, right up to where that waste ultimately ends up. So how is it managed at the very end? So we're looking at a series of these steps, and also need to look at the interface with the user as well as various other stakeholders along this chain of events. Next, please. Okay, so one of the basic one of the key things that we're looking at is menstrual waste as a solid waste. And one of the key things that we see in a lot of our urban interventions, which is critical when we're looking at FSM, which is that some cities in India that have done a good job of this, such as Pune and Bangalore, look at effectively segregating menstrual waste and diapers for children from other household waste. So separating it from the wet waste, from the dry waste, and then having this third category of waste. So this is an absolutely essential critical step, and this is what they have actually emphasized on. And there are various tactics that organizations have taken to convince users and generators of waste, as well as municipal corporations, to promote and to support effective segregation at source, so the primary segregation. If you could click again, please. And once more, thank you. And once again, yes, thank you. Sorry, could you go back? So sorry. Here is, again, if we're looking at solid waste, and we've had more success with this in the urban rather than in the rural areas. So we're looking at, primary segregation, collection, transportation, and then perhaps even a secondary layer. And here is where we need to also bring in that lens of our sanitation workers, waste pickers. What's their role? How do we ensure their safety? How do we ensure their dignity as they are engaging with this task? As well as how do we equip them and capacitate them to engage well with both residents or people who are generating the waste, as well as municipal corporations, because we often find them stuck in the middle between these stakeholder groups. Next, please. Now, the other ways that we can look at waste is also to reduce the waste volume. And here, Florian and Ina, I think they both have talked about how reusable products, whether it's pads, period panties, menstrual cups, help to simply reduce the waste volume. So this is one way that we can deal with the waste. And again, in India, urban areas, there's a pretty vibrant movement in several cities that's looking at reusables. Next, please. Okay, the other, if you could click again, please. Thank you. So there's another method which is looking at sterilizing waste, and which looks at both risk reduction and volume reduction. These are very experimental. So we've got autoclave machines, very similar to what's used in healthcare facilities, to sterilize your pads, and chemical treatments that help to dissolve the inner absorbent core, leaving the plastic, the top sheet and the bottom sheet, for later kind of processing. But these are very experimental. There's a certain amount of waste that's still left that requires further treatment, further processing, and very importantly, it requires people who have the capacity and training to be able to handle this process, which is quite complex, quite technical, and the equipment may also be difficult for a layman like me to be able to work. Next slide, please. Yes, if you could just click. Yes. So the third kind of option that we're looking at is to transform waste. Okay. And here we have, again, a number of options, some of which are experimental. We have composting solutions. We have chemical treatments and recycling, like the Faber plant and of PNG that exists. And then, of course, we have incineration solutions. So if we just quickly go through these. Next slide, please. So in India, we've been experimenting with deep burial, and we want to experiment with composting and with vermicomposting. But we wanted to go with deep burial, which are pits which are dug below ground, or as you can see here, where we had a high water table area in one of our schools, we constructed an above ground pit, very simple construction, just with brick. And we layered it with pads and soil, and then with lime. And then we closed the pit, we let it rest for about 5 to 6 months. And we found that the matter had decomposed, and that the chemical composition of the soil was within permissible limits for the stuff that we tested against. So this is the solution, but again, we did this in pilot mode. So there's a lot more need for experimentation for these non-burn solutions. Next, please. There's also some really exciting innovation on the sterilization and chemical treatment. So there's a young company called Pad Care Labs in India that come up with a machine that shreds pads, that chemically treats them, and also separates certain kinds of waste so that the waste volume is reduced and the plastic can be taken out separately and can be processed separately. So some great innovations that we're seeing. This is a machine that can be installed, say, in community toilets or in public toilets for effective management. Next, please. Now, incinerator technologies. Now, in India, we see a lot of incinerator technologies. They're very popular. We see a lot of small-scale incinerators, these small boxes, electric, many of them are just hooked up to an electrical supply. Some of them just work on regular fuel, newspapers, coal, wood, kerosene, and they may be as simple as just like these burning chambers made out of concrete or of clay. Then we also have these large-scale incinerators, biomedical, as well as centralized incinerator facilities. And there is some discussion by the government looking at waste-to-energy solutions. If you could press once more. Please click again. Thank you. Great. Now, our biggest concern is that it seems to be a lack of understanding on incinerators, that not all are safe for health and the environment. If we're looking at the small scale incinerators and those that are made at home, they have inefficient and incomplete burning, which results in the release of dioxins and furans, which are cancer-causing chemicals. So we do need to be looking at this kind of technology a little more carefully. Next, please. So some considerations for us, especially in urban settings, as well as in rural settings, especially in schools where incinerators are hugely popular, is that we need to be looking at the type, composition, and the volume of the product that is being disposed. Are we going for your regular, what in India we call the fluff pad or the rui pad? Are you going for your ultra-thin pads which have sap in it? Do you have compostable pads? What's the kind of waste that's going into these incinerators? What's the setting for use and where are these incinerators placed? I've been to several schools where the incinerators are placed within a school toilet complex and the fumes are just released within that complex, which is terribly hazardous for those girls. We also have issues related to minimum and maximum burning temperatures. From what we know, that incinerators that burn below 800 degrees Celsius are at risk for releasing more toxic fuels. We also need to be looking into adherence to design principles. And this is where it starts getting complicated because we have no standard design that is widely shared in the country, especially for small scale incinerators. So we need to be looking into issues such as single or dual chambers, pressure controls, emission controls, and how this kind of influences and informs the process of emissions. Now in India, we do have a central pollution control board that has state level agencies as well. And they do have standards for large and biomedical incinerator facilities. Some of those standards can be applicable to the small scale, but we need to know them and then we need to adhere to them. And I think as was pointed out, operations and maintenance is such a huge issue. Our small incinerators break down very quickly. They're jammed with pads. Nobody wants to take the pads out. So they just stop working. And of course, there's a certain amount of cost that is associated with incinerators. It's not just a one-time cost of buying them, but the O&M costs and the cost of operators, especially for the higher end machines, needs to be factored in. Next, please. Okay, so I'll end with this slide. And I think that our biggest takeaway in India from working at various levels program, and especially with policy, is that there are so many sector actors working on menstrual health and hygiene. It's not just health, it's not just WASH, it's not just the tribal development department or the education department, but we have environment, consumer affairs, and so many others who are directly or indirectly linked with what we're doing here. And I think that our biggest kind of need of the hour for those of us who are working at a policy level, whether at a national or subnational level in any country, is that across government agencies and other stakeholders that we work with, we need to continuously create greater awareness of those solutions that we have, create noise about it, keep talking about it, and about the different buckets of solutions. We need to work on standards, okay? So not just making or influencing standards, but what we've realized in India is that the government of India has standards, but state governments are not aware of them. So how can we create awareness? How can we ease pathways to adherence and what are the processes for doing so? And very importantly, we've been doing some work around procurement of pads and of incinerators, and it's quite a minefield. And we realize that even when we're looking at procurement processes, and UNICEF and UNFPA have a great procurement guideline out now for products, we need to be looking at incorporating these into procurement processes, operational guidelines for programs, as well as in terms of monitoring indicators. So thank you all for your very patient listening. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Arundati, for educating us about the reality behind products and waste management and with practical examples. I think in the interest of time, we'll only take the first two questions that were already posted on the chat. My colleague Finn will help us identify those questions now. Over to you, Finn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shobana. First of all, there were a lot of comments and like really interesting questions, so it's a bit hard to choose on which question. But the first question is going to Ina. You said that in your slide, the number of girls and women who are menstruating, but you also said that not everybody menstruating is a woman or a girl. Could you please specify on that?
Yeah. Yes, of course. Like everyone, we know that menstruation is a biological process, and for that you need an uterus. And there are especially transgender persons who, like transgender men, have an uterus, so they're also able to have menstruation, while transgender women, they don't have an uterus, so they're not. So therefore, we often sometimes like to use people who menstruate, but the majority, of course, are women and girls, and for the ease of it, we use that terminology. I hope that made it more clear.
Thank you very much, Ina. And the second question was also from Debisha, but then again asked later in the chat again. And it refers to Florian, I think, and I think Arundati in her presentation also tackled this question. So the question was on biodegradable menstrual hygiene products. Menstrual blood is categorized as domestic hazardous waste or as biomedical waste because of its human origin. So the question was, will composting menstrual products with regular wet waste, for example, fruit and vegetable waste, create issues? And what about the pathogen which are part of any biomedical waste?
Maybe I will start. Arundati, you can finish. I would say that to avoid any of these problems, we want to advise people to just bury the pad and not necessarily compost it. So bury it and let it there and not use the compost out of it. Yeah, that's what we advise to avoid this problem. Maybe Arundati, you want to precise something?
Sure. So, so from what we see, or whatever we know, is that there have been some composting experiments that have been done, and I think in Nepal we also have had some great vermicomposting experiments that HEGAF has done, and they've actually done it with actual used pads as well as pads with animal blood on them. So both have been done, and they haven't found that, at least in that pilot level, this to be hazardous as such. So we haven't found that. So I think that we have to, when we're looking at composting solutions, we also need to have it in a contained or in a controlled manner. So it's not that you're throwing it out of the open, right? You have a composting pit, and it could be a huge pit, it could be a smaller pit, depending on your where you are and where you're doing this. But it is a contained space, and so there is a certain level of control. So there is a difference between doing this composting and then throwing it out in the open, where you could have an issue where the hazard from the blood can affect others, especially those who may come in contact with this waste. So from what we know from the experiments, and these are experiments right now, we haven't done any of this at scale anywhere, that is relatively safe, it's relatively effective. We've had some concerns about how does vermicomposting work with other types of pads, but we've seen, I think, from what Maheshji and HECAF have shared, that it's worked quite well across pads. Of course, they do recommend that this be done with the compostable variety and not be done with your ultra thin pads with sap in it, because that's harmful to the worms. But I think our response to this is it's done in a contained and in a particular setting, And I think that we need to do more to understand that what are the hazards moving forward. So yes, sorry, not a perfect answer, but hopefully in a couple of years when we know more, we'll be able to answer better.
Yeah. So thank you for answering the questions. Now, in the interest of time, let's go into the breakout rooms. Finn, could you project the questions, please? You'll be automatically assigned into breakout rooms. And when we come back after 15 minutes, we will just have 2 minutes where we will have key takeaways from each group. So kindly identify someone who can just give one key takeaway, very quick, 1 minute, one key takeaway from your breakout rooms. For those who are not assigned, don't worry, our tech crew will be taking care of it. So we can go ahead and join the breakout rooms now. Yes, I see that the other group has joined us. So quickly to conclude the session, I'd like to invite someone from group 1 to just summarize very briefly what they discussed.
Hi, yes. So group 1 was discussing the challenges on integrating MHM, and we discussed challenges on seriousness and behavioral change of the topic within communities and the government, lack of awareness on its impact on climate, women being in decision-making authorities, and then again, institutionalizing the national policy on MHM and how can that be drawn to actual implementation at the state level. Apart from a lot of other topics which were spoken about, but I could gather these 4 as the main ones.
Thanks a lot, Drishti, for your feedback or just a brief summary on what was discussed in group 1. So I could just pitch in for group 2, where we discussed that the overarching discussion point was that users need to be educated. There is still a lot of taboo and ignorance, especially among young women and children. And this user education is the only way we could break this barrier. And also engagement with government and making sure that we have solutions and the right human resources for implementing these solutions are really important. So it is important to have this multi-stakeholder partnership, or rather working with different sectors, the wash sector and the hygiene sector work, the FSM sector and the hygiene sector work with each other. Also there was a small discussion point on sensitive infrastructure, making sure that infrastructure is gender sensitive, and also when it comes to community public toilets that are being constructed to make sure that we reach our SDG goals, have to be gender sensitive. And we have to also address the problem with vandalism and making sure that women feel safe and have a disposal option. And with lack of disposal option, it is quite obvious that the menstrual waste would lead or would be dumped into waste streams or the FSM systems we work with. So that's it from group 2. With this, I would like to thank everyone for joining the session. I hope it was fruitful and interesting. Menstrual Hygiene Day was celebrated on the 28th of May, just a few days ago, but I think Wash United would still be hosting a Wash studio tomorrow. This could be seen in the Wash United's website if needed. I think Ina also shared her contact. So I hope you're able to integrate menstrual hygiene and health in your work and advocate for it. Thank you all for joining the session once again, and have a great time at the conference. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.